Hello and welcome to Cash In on IT, your go-to podcast for all things information technology at MCC. My name is Art Brown. I'm the Dean of IT at MCC, and I'm thrilled to guide you on this exciting journey through the dynamic world of IT. Together, we'll explore the latest trends, innovations, and success stories within our department, giving you an insider's look at what makes our IT community thrive. Throughout our various episodes, we'll shine spotlights on incredible talent of our faculty, dedication of our staff, and some of the ambitious spirits of our students. I welcome you to sit back, relax, listen to our seasoned IT professionals and aspiring students as we begin this journey on our podcast. Welcome to another episode of Cash In on IT. My name is Art Brown and Dean of IT. I'm glad to have one of my colleagues here, Mr. Guillermo Rosas. Yep, G, glad to have you. So today we're going to talk about the evolution of our IT Technician Career Certificate. Mr. Rosas is our lead instructor on that pathway. We've had an evolution of the pathway over the last 12 to 18 months, and we're going to speak to Mr. Rosas today about that evolution and some of the things he's brought to the classroom. So Mr. Rosas, again, welcome. Glad to have you back with us again today. Today, just want to have you share with our audience and prospective students the current state of our IT Technician Career Pathway. If you can give a brief overview of coursework students might experience, and then two, some of the evolution that you've brought to the curriculum in the last 12 to 18 months, please.
Sure. To start off, I probably need to provide some context and history. So I've been working full-time at MCC since 2011. What is that, 13 years full-time. Right. And I was adjunct for 2 years prior to that, so gotcha. A few years. When I started, and certainly when you started, our program was very siloed. We had different constituencies competing for the same students, and about 4 years ago or so, maybe it was even longer than that, I started advocating for a more unified approach, especially not for everything because it's not all the same, but around the systems, what I'm calling the systems perspective, things that feed into cybersecurity, server administration, and now cloud, that there's a common set of skills that we could combine to create basically the base of a pyramid. Right. And so we've discussed this numerous times over the years, and we finally came up with what's called the IT Technician Certificate. And the IT Technician Certificate seeks to basically equip students with a basic set of what we've called core IT skills. And so they go through and they have basic customer service of the new revamped A+ program. They work with trouble tickets. They work with building computers. They work with software and customer support. They're exposed to computer networking. And they're exposed to various facets of IT that can then funnel into higher level certificate programs such as the server admin, cybersecurity, etc. Gotcha. So with that, we've taken industry certifications and we use that to basically inform what this is going to look like. When I took this over about a year ago or so, we had an alignment with A+ indirectly through the Cisco program. It was PC Essentials, I think, was what our stuff was. And we swapped that out with the actual CompTIA A+ curriculum. We kept the Cisco curriculum more applicable, i.e. networking. And we looked at the curriculum and kind of took a 10,000 foot view of it and said, well, how do we add kind of that critical thinking aspect that's going to be kind of key to these students being successful in the field? It's easy to give somebody a task where it says, find this information on the screen. And I'm not necessarily sure what that teaches them beyond, what they're looking at in terms of numbers and whatnot. Moreover, we had a move towards a lot of sims, and it's just something that's developed over time. And click here, and I'm not necessarily sure that students were getting a lot out of it. So as we're looking at this problem, we're like, well, there's some value to the sims. They can set a baseline. There's some value to some of these simpler tasks in terms of establishing a vocabulary and whatnot. But how do we develop those problem-solving skills, which are going to be really key? And so as we went and we revamped the PC repair program, which aligns to A+, we advocated to actually get equipment in the lab, new equipment. And as part of that, I rewrote the curriculum. And a lot of the learning that takes place in the lab is student driven. So we have a brief lecture, maybe a half hour, to introduce topics at a high level. And then students work through 2 or 3 workbooks every week. They've got everything laid out for them, but each individual will go through these tasks. And what happens is we end up with an individualized learning approach. If one student is struggling with one concept, and another student's not struggling with that concept, well, we can address that individual student's problems, right, at that time.
And if I could pause,
Yeah.
Mr. Rosas, for the audience that may not know, you mentioned sims, virtual simulations. If you want to maybe just expand on that a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so sims would be things like you might have a point and click screen where you're simulating connecting a patch cable into a switch or a device, and or potentially clicking and removing a cover off of a device, and it really doesn't give you that hands-on.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm playing to, is that some of these things the students aren't necessarily connecting the physical tactile aspect. I like to tell a lot of my students that years ago my dad taught me how to change spark plugs.
Right.
Working class, poor, we didn't have torque wrenches. My dad would, he basically taught me by feel.
Right.
I'm sure there was some level of error in that, but we never ended up, crashing a cylinder head into a spark plug. The cars worked, we did our own type of maintenance. But there's something to be said if, Dad had told me, do this and then expected me to do this versus,
virtually, yeah. Or
out of my way, let me show you,
Yes.
and me getting a feel for what was supposed to be done. And I've taken that lesson with me, 20, 30 years down the road. And I think that translates to our students as well, to actually identify a patch cable, to see what it looks like, to differentiate RJ45 cable from something that's like a telephone cable, and to actually plug it in to know the orientation, which on the surface seems to be common sense, isn't necessarily. We've had some stuff get damaged because people don't realize that stuff goes in one way. So it's very important that we have this tactile learning. The sims are good, we still incorporate them, but the way that the A+ classes have evolved is we actually kind of have them what's called flipped, and so we have students do prep work as homework. So they'll go and do these sims or these virtual tasks prior to coming into the class. And then when they come in, we'll take those concepts that they should have done before they came to class, and then we'll say, well, now this is real equipment. Right. Now you really need to set an IP address. And if it's wrong or you have the same IP address, we're going to see what actually happens, right? Because it's not as clear and pretty as it is, in that sim.
Right.
So that's what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
Yeah. To go back to my previous point with that individualized learning, though, we find that, things can happen. And it surprises instructors. I was telling somebody earlier that our faculty will have to be on their feet because we're working with real equipment, real hardware, real stuff that can happen. And so we have to be able to troubleshoot, on the fly and work with this. But it opens an interesting opportunity for us to actually sit with the student as we're actively troubleshooting and to talk to, talk through this process to say, this is what I think is going on. Let's actually see this together, which is very unusual because you can't do that when people are taking stuff and doing it at home, or if you just come and you fix it for them, right? So it's opened up a lot of opportunities for a different way of teaching, teaching to the student for a specific problem, and then addressing the student's specific learning needs at the point in their progress. Moreover, 15 years ago, whatever, when I started 11, I don't know, pick your poison. A long time ago, the kind of the prevailing methodology was to kind of try to walk everybody through the same thing at the same time. So you could have a class of 25, 30 people, and it was like trying to herd cats. Everybody moved at a different pace, and it wasn't necessary that the student, was more capable or not. People read more slowly, people read more carefully, and it's just not ideal to try to keep them on the same pace. So turning them over to this individualized learning allows them to move at the pace that's appropriate for them, and then the instructor, comes in and does their stuff. Today we had a class of 20 students that were working through, we do ports and protocols, and so they use Wireshark to actually see the difference between unencrypted protocol like Telnet and an encrypted protocol like SSH, and they can actually see the two different protocols. But with that, 20 students is kind of hard to manage with all that stuff. Our students, we still have some working almost at 4 o'clock, so almost 4 hours after the course started, but they're working at their own pace. Nobody's getting rushed. The students that finished earlier, I'm of the mindset that we use as much time as we need. As long as they complete their stuff, they go about their lives, and they can continue on. So to kind of get to the core point, we've kind of changed things quite a bit as we've stepped in terms of trying to bring, it's kind of odd because the pendulum swings one way, we move, towards putting a lot of stuff virtual and stuff like that, and then we realize that the pendulum has to swing back another way. So we're trying to find that equilibrium. That's kind of teaching in general, right? Is always trying to find that.
And the thing I like about it, I mean, you've touched on it, is that it's, it's a good hybrid balance of the two. That tactile learning is important. As we know, it lays that foundational skill for
any field, but specifically IT, and students that are going to be working in networking security or any adjacent field, having those fundamental skills are going to be so critical. So I love that piece and how the curriculum has evolved there. You've also touched on briefly the class model where it's not just an instructor, but we have lab techs or teaching, short of a teaching assistant, but they're serving, our lab techs, student, we have many names, that's why I'm kind of stalling here. Our student workers that are classroom support representatives. So that model is it's been invaluable. And I kind of wanted to share that with our audience. We have, prospective students and others that are looking and seeing what we're doing at MCC and how are we differentiating ourselves in the educational space. And just nothing, I think you kind of said it, back to basics and things that we've gotten away from. And at least from my vantage point as an administrator, I see that we get great feedback from students. One measures that enrollment is off the charts. Students are overwhelmingly coming back to campus for these foundational skills, and the students see the value in that experience. And so that part is something I wanted to share with our audience and, have you elaborate on it. So I'm so happy that you've been able to dive into that a little bit. Can you maybe, with the time we have left, maybe kind of talk a little bit about the courses in the core foundational skill set? You touched on them a little bit, the A+ PC Repair 1 course, maybe just for the audience listening, what they might expect to see. One thing I will share is that, we're working, I think your model is working. We're talking to some of our other faculty to see how they can integrate to some degree or a portion or all of this model where it's kind of a flipped classroom, more tactile learning. So just an overview of what students might expect to see as a foundational networking, cybersecurity, cloud server administrator type student coming through this role.
So if we're talking the TETCA, or the IT technician specifically, a student ideally would come in and they would have their workforce or workplace skills course, which is kind of a course that I teach it here. I just taught it at 8 a.m. this morning. It focuses on, I hate to say soft skills, but they're very important. How do we communicate with other people? How do we work with a team? How do we interact with people who may be different from us? And so that kind of sets the precedent for working in a modern, very globalized world, right? Our next class, ideally, would be our Intro to IT or Info 1002. That's where a lot of this individualized learning came from. When I took that class over, I don't know, it was during the COVID days, so what was that, 4 years ago? Something like that. It's all a blur. The course was all research papers. Every week, students wrote research papers. And I've been in IT over 30 years. I started collecting money for services around the age of 13. So I didn't do that writing papers. That's not what excited me. And I like what I do. It's put wrinkles on my face, but I like what I do. It's a challenging endeavor that's actually fun at the end of the day. I want my students to leave with that same sort of, spark that could ignite a passion. So when I took that class over, we re-examined it and we said, well, how do we bring this tactile learning in? So that's kind of where things started. So a student that goes through Intro to IT, it's a survey course, which means they're going to cover a broad array of topics. They will be creating user accounts. They actually do dictionary tags as the last exercise in the class. We had spare equipment, and so we've reused Raspberry Pis to actually have them build small computers and install operating systems, all to give them that sort of experience. But it's a survey, right? I walk them through all of these things. They're not really solving any problems so much, but they're getting a taste of what all of these little things look like. And so from there, they could segue into our A+ aligned classes, which are PC Repair 1 and 2, which, as I mentioned, focus on customer support, problem solving, basic computer networking, some intro cyber topics, and software support through installation of Microsoft Windows, examining Linux, and stuff like that. They would then segue into a class that's specifically Windows-oriented, Windows Operating Systems 1. They would get a taste of Linux through a Linux-specific class, which is Info 1111. So they would learn Linux from the command line, which a lot of folks are like, Linux. They spend some time in the command line over 11 weeks. Hopefully they get out more comfortable with this operating system that for a lot of folks can be nebulous, but it forms an important component in a lot of the modern IT infrastructure. And then they should take 3 Cisco classes. One would be a survey of all networking, and then a second one and a third one would specialize a little bit more. So by the end of this, they should have an idea of how to work with Microsoft Windows, Linux, and basic networking.
Gotcha, love it. And again, just testimony to your vision, collaboration with our faculty to help transform what we've had and hopefully sparking, hopefully, I think you mentioned in your intro to IT course that course that will light a fire, spark the interest of students that maybe don't know where they want to go, and hopefully that tactile learning, the conversation, this classroom engagement will hopefully open the doors for providing a vision for students for where they want to go.
I hope so. I hope we've been successful. I've seen some names that popped up that they were general study students who didn't know that they wanted to be in tech. And then people talk, they're like, oh, I think I want to come into tech. But this quarter, I actually saw going into Laura Olberding's class, one of those students.
Right.
So I know we caught them.
We did, yeah.
We caught them.
Yeah.
So.
No, and I've heard more of that. I've just had an opportunity recently to talk to students across the campuses, and they've mentioned the experience here and kind of came in similar, didn't really know where they wanted to go. And ironically, a lot of students are rethinking, just spoke to some of your students today, and like, wow, I didn't think about this as a pathway. We just spoke to some high school students fairly recently too, and something they never thought about, the foundational skills they'll get at this level that can open up the door for many pathways of learning and opportunities. So, Mr. Rose,
it's exciting times. I want to talk, if we have a moment, about
Yeah,
our
let's
lab
go.
techs,
Yeah,
if you'll let me. So the lab techs are student workers. So we had our enrollments have increased as we've revamped these labs. So when I inherited the A+ program, we had a lab that was 12. We had 12 seats. And now we have 20 seats in that lab. And I actually finagled my way to getting a second lab with 14 seats. So I have 34 seats, and I may have even more if I can keep finagling my way to get more seats. But the problem is that emerged, the law of unintended consequences, is as we got more seats, we found that the courses were a little bit more difficult to manage. As we integrated this stuff into a broader audience, we found that some of our students don't have computers at home, they've never touched stuff and whatnot. And so we had some incidences where there were some safety concerns, where people were disassembling stuff that they shouldn't have been doing, or working on equipment that was still plugged in. So I went back to the drawing board. I'm like, look, we're facing this major issue. It's a concern of mine. Nobody got hurt, but there's something, I've heard that code is written in blood, and it's usually around the topic of building codes. And it talks to the fact that we don't make changes until there's been an accident.
Right.
I don't believe in that. I'd like to address stuff preemptively. And so working with you, we were able to hire student workers who now work with the instructor. And so as students are working, these lab techs will also go around the class to make sure that stuff is done safely, that students are working correctly, disconnecting stuff. They'll also assist in the event the instructor can't assist. And I'm hoping that a takeaway from that is we have a safer environment, for one. Right. I think we've made that change. I hope we've made that change. And we've been successful. But the other thing I've noticed is students are also getting more rapid assistance in classes that are 20 or more.
Right.
And they're getting a diverse set of those types of forms of assistance. But the flip side of this is these lab techs, the one thing I've argued for years is it's very difficult for young people to put anything on their resume.
Yes.
Right? How do you get work experience? How are you supposed to come in with 5 years of work experience? It's a chicken and egg catch-22 thing.
Right.
But I'm hoping the takeaway is that these lab techs are now getting applied learning experience that they can now put on their resume and take out and say, I've done this. This is the task I've done. And we've seen the growth of the lab techs in terms of their own proficiencies, their comfort and whatnot. So it is kind of one of those things where I never really saw that coming to fruition. I was more concerned with the safety and whatnot. But as this has grown, we have very capable young folks who have come into our program and taken on this lab tech role. We're actually growing it even more.
I love it.
And it's a great way of getting them that work experience that, how else could you and I years ago talked about something we called, I know UNO has the attic, I like the basement. Nobody likes that, so we'll call it the garage. But it's empowering these student workers with oversight to be an important component in our program, and peer assistance, unlike we've seen before.
Yeah, and I love that. You've alluded to the incubator that we've been brainstorming for years. More to come on that, as you know. But the part I like what you mentioned, the unintended consequence of the invaluable experience that students get. I've kind of seen it. I know you've seen it with some of our recent hires, just watching the evolution and the growth and maturity. And this has led to some more permanent positions for some of our students, which I'm super excited about for them, both internal and external. So it's invaluable. I always say all experience is good experience, and if students can recognize that early, if we can help bridge that gap, that's a huge win. In addition to the classroom, they're going to get classroom experience.
We are a community.
We are. We do our best to serve the community.
I believe that's what we.
That's our charge. Absolutely. Yeah. So I love it. Yeah. I just wanted to, glad to have you on again today. I thought it was worth showcasing for our MCC community at large, and then broader Omaha community, what we're doing, some of the successes, and hope we can have you on again to talk more about it. Keep going.
I'd like to do one more thing, one more plug, and that is the Super Friday initiative I want to talk about real quick.
Please do.
So we were told for years that no students came on Fridays.
Right.
When I was in industry, I used to take Fridays off. I'd work 4/10s. And when I was teaching here at MCC, I used to live in Lewiston. I used to live near Seymour Smith Park. We'd walk the dogs, and on Fridays, the park was packed.
Right.
And so I don't think I was the only one that was taking Fridays off. So I came to you and I said, hey, Art, can we do Friday classes? Well, some folks were like, well, nobody comes on Friday. You allowed me to test that out, and the first time we ran Friday classes, we actually had wait lists and we had to open them up. So we ran these for a year, and what we ended up coming up with is something called Super Friday. So we offer 13 and a half credit hours back to back, 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 4.
Right.
And students can come in, they can knock out 3 classes.
Right.
Boom, back to back. And the classes are full. We have 20 seats every
quarter, and
every single class that's offered are taken.
And they fill up quickly. The first classes that fill up.
I looked at the schedule for next quarter. We're 7 weeks out, I think.
And they're almost full.
Half full already. So that's kind of a big thing that I'm very proud of. Is when I was a student years ago, it was so difficult to get through systems. I was in the armed forces, so that was another challenge. But you can't get classes scheduled. Things are kind of out all over the place. I'm hoping this Super Friday block is a big block that people can plan their lives around to say, I know this class is going to be offered, here, and as long as they register on time, that's the key thing.
That is the key thing.
I have one. He's absent today, but he's here at 8. He's at 10, and he's at 12. And this gentleman he's got a family and stuff.
Right.
A lot of people have obligations, work, and all that stuff. He could just knock out all these credits in one day, and it's a painful day, as he puts it. But it's done.
It's done.
It's done.
And it helps him to progress through his pathway.
That's exactly the thing.
Yes. And the other, other unintended consequence, just trial and error. We've offered a similar model on Saturday. Those classes are filling up too. So, just the fact that we're able to pivot, hopefully listen to what students are telling us to make ourselves available so we can fit everyone's needs to the reasonable degree that we can.
Indeed.
So I love it. Yeah, just great things happening here. I think our audience deserves to know. And again, glad to have you tell more. I know we're going to be coming back. We've got more stories to share in the near future. So we're working on some things as always. But
always.
Glad to have you join us, and we'll talk to you again soon.